Welcome to my YouTube channel, where today we're diving into a world that most people walk right past every single day without even realizing they might be stepping over a fortune. Because what if I told you that hiding in old jars, tucked away in forgotten drawers, or even mixed in with your everyday pocket change, there could be a small copper coin that looks absolutely ordinary, but is actually worth a staggering $350 million dollars. And I'm talking about the 1944 wheat penny, a coin so common in appearance that you might have held one in your hand 100 times without giving it a second thought. Yet certain versions of this humble penny have become the holy grail for collectors worldwide. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something crucial here, because this isn't just about one coin. Today, we're going to reveal a series of wheat pennies that are worth absolutely mind-blowing amounts of money. And each one we discuss is going to be more valuable than the last, so you absolutely need to stick around until the very end, because the final coin we're going to talk about will leave you speechless. And trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking details about what makes these coins worth more than most people's homes, more than luxury cars, more than anything you could imagine from such a tiny piece of copper. But first, let's talk about this 1944 wheat penny and why it's created such an incredible buzz in the numismatic community. Now, the 1944 wheat penny, at first glance, seems like the most ordinary coin you could possibly find, because the United States Mint produced over 1.4 billion wheat pennies in 1944 across 3 different mint facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, making it one of the most common pennies ever created. And you might be wondering how on earth something so common could possibly be worth $350 million. And that's where the story gets absolutely fascinating, because 1944 was a pivotal year in American history. World War II was still raging across Europe and the Pacific, and the United States economy was completely mobilized for the war effort, which meant that every ounce of metal was precious and needed to be carefully managed and allocated. And this is where our story takes an incredible turn that created one of the most valuable error coins in existence. You see, in 1943, the year before our featured coin, the U.S. Mint had made a dramatic change to penny production because copper was desperately needed for the war effort, specifically for making ammunition casings and other military supplies. So the Mint switched to making pennies out of zinc-coated steel, creating what collectors now call the steel penny or white penny because of its silvery appearance. And this was meant to be a temporary wartime measure. But here's where things get interesting, because in 1944, when the war situation had improved slightly and copper became available again, the Mint switched back to making copper pennies, using shell casings and other recycled copper materials. And this is where the magic happened, because during this transition back to copper, something remarkable occurred that would create some of the most sought-after error coins in American numismatic history. During the changeover from steel to copper production in 1944, a small number of steel planchets, which are the blank metal discs that get stamped into coins, somehow remained in the machinery and accidentally got stamped with the 1944 date, creating steel pennies with a 1944 date when they were supposed to be copper. And similarly, some copper planchets from 1944 may have been struck on the wrong composition or with unique characteristics that make them extraordinarily rare. And these error coins are what drive the astronomical values we're talking about today. Because when you have a coin that was never supposed to exist, struck by mistake at a government mint facility, with only a handful of examples known to exist in the entire world, you have the recipe for a numismatic treasure that collectors will pay absolutely anything to own. The most famous example of a 1944 steel penny sold at auction for over $180,000. And there are rumors in the collecting community of private sales reaching into the millions for specimens in perfect condition. But the $350 million figure comes into play when we talk about the theoretical value of a perfect, undiscovered specimen with full provenance and certification, combined with the right auction environment where multiple billionaire collectors are bidding against each other. And while this might sound far-fetched, we've seen rare coins break record after record in recent years, with some pennies selling for over $1 million at major auctions, and experts believe that if the absolute finest 1944 steel penny era were to come to market under the right circumstances, with the perfect storm of wealthy collectors, media attention, and historical significance all converging at once, the sky truly is the limit for what someone might pay. But here's what makes this even more exciting for you. Because while the ultra-rare era versions are the ones hitting the million-dollar marks, there are also other varieties and conditions of 1944 wheat pennies that are worth serious money, anywhere from a few $100s to several thousand, depending on the mint mark, the condition, and specific characteristics. And this is why you need to check every single wheat penny you come across, because the 1944 D penny from Denver or the 1944 S from San Francisco, especially in uncirculated condition, can be worth significant money. And there are also double die errors, off-center strikes, and other varieties that command premium prices from collectors who are desperately trying to complete their collections. And the beautiful thing about wheat pennies is that they're still out there, sitting in old collections, stuffed in coffee cans in attics, mixed into change jars that have been sitting in closets for decades, and every single day someone discovers that what they thought was worthless pocket change is actually worth a small fortune. The design of the wheat penny itself is a piece of American history that makes these coins even more collectible because they feature Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, making them the first U.S. circulating coin to feature a historical figure. And on the reverse, they display two wheat stalks, which is why they're called wheat pennies. And this design was used from 1909 all the way through 1958, giving us 50 years of wheat pennies to search through. And the 1944 specifically represents that pivotal moment in American history when the nation was transitioning from wartime production back toward peacetime, making it not just a coin, but a tangible piece of World War II history that you can hold in your hand. And collectors love that story. They love that connection to history, and they're willing to pay enormous premiums for coins that represent significant moments in American heritage. Now, here's something I need you to understand about coin collecting and values. Because when we talk about a coin being worth $350 million, we're talking about the absolute peak theoretical value under perfect circumstances. But the reality is that even common, valuable versions of this coin are worth far more than face value. And this is why you should never, ever spend a wheat penny without checking it first, because you could literally be throwing away thousands of dollars, and the process of checking is actually quite simple. You look for the mint mark, which is a tiny letter below the date on the front of the coin, with no letter meaning it was made in Philadelphia, a D meaning Denver, and an S meaning San Francisco. Then you examine the coin's condition, looking for sharp details, original color, and minimal wear. And if you find anything unusual, like a coin that seems to be the wrong color, has doubling in the letters or numbers, or shows any kind of striking error, that's when you need to get it authenticated by a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, because a professional grade can make the difference between a coin that's worth. Next, the 1951 wheat penny USA coin worth $360 million. And if you thought the 1944 was incredible, wait until you hear about this one, because the 1951 wheat penny represents another fascinating chapter in American coinage history that has created some of the most valuable and sought-after era coins in the entire numismatic world. And what makes this particular year so special is a combination of factors that came together to create coins that are worth absolutely staggering amounts of money. And we're talking about a coin that on the surface looks completely ordinary. A simple copper penny that millions of Americans handled every single day back in the early 1950s without giving it a second thought. Yet hiding among those millions of common coins are a few extraordinary specimens that could literally set you up for life if you're lucky enough to discover one. And the $360 million valuation we're discussing represents the absolute peak of what the most perfect, most rare example could potentially bring at auction under ideal circumstances with the right buyers competing for it. But even lesser examples of the rare varieties can be worth tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is still absolutely life-changing money for finding something that fits in the palm of your hand. Now, to understand why the 1951 wheat penny can be worth so much, we need to transport ourselves back to post-World War II America, because by 1951, the United States had emerged from the war as the world's dominant superpower. The economy was booming, suburbs were expanding, and American manufacturing was running at full capacity, and the U.S. Mint facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were producing hundreds of millions of coins to meet the demand of this rapidly growing economy. And in 1951 specifically, the Philadelphia Mint alone produced over 284 million wheat pennies, while Denver added nearly 625 million more, making it one of the higher production years for wheat pennies. And you might be thinking that with so many coins produced, how could any of them possibly be rare? But this is where the fascinating world of mint errors comes into play. Because even with strict quality control at the mint, mistakes happen, and when they do, they create coins that are unlike anything else that was supposed to exist. And these error coins become the holy grail for collectors who will pay absolutely anything to own them. The most famous and valuable error associated with the 1951 wheat penny is what collectors call a wrong planchet error, which occurs when a coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination. And imagine the scene at the mint, with multiple coin presses running simultaneously, producing different denominations all in the same facility, and occasionally, a blank meant for a dime or even a quarter could accidentally end up in the penny press, or vice versa, creating a coin that has the design of one denomination but the size and metal composition of another. And these wrong planchet errors are extraordinarily rare because they represent a perfect storm of mistakes. The wrong blank had to be in the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. And then it had to somehow escape the quality control process and make it into circulation. And then it had to survive for decades without being damaged or lost. And finally, it had to be discovered by someone who recognized what they had. And when you consider all of those factors, you begin to understand why these errors are so incredibly valuable. But the 1951 wheat penny has other error varieties that are also worth serious money, including the famous 1951 S double die obverse, where the letters and numbers on the front of the coin show clear doubling, creating a dramatic visual effect that makes the coin immediately recognizable as something special. And this doubling occurs during the die-making process when the master hub impresses the design onto the working die multiple times with a slight offset between impressions, creating a doubled image that then gets stamped onto every coin produced from that die. And while the mint usually catches and destroys dies with obvious doubling, occasionally one slips through and produces a small number of coins before the error is noticed. And these double die coins are among the most sought-after varieties in all of coin collecting because they're dramatic, visible to the naked eye, and extremely limited in number. And a 1951 S-wheat penny with strong doubling in gem uncirculated condition could easily sell for tens of thousands of dollars at auction, with the theoretical maximum value climbing into the millions if the perfect specimen were to surface. Another factor that drives the value of 1951 wheat pennies is the overall condition and what collectors call originality. Because by 1951, coin collecting was already a popular hobby in America, and many people were setting aside rolls of new pennies directly from banks, hoping they might be valuable someday. And this means that unlike earlier wheat pennies where finding uncirculated examples is extremely difficult, there are actually quite a few 1951 pennies that survived in pristine condition, but here's the catch. The coins that were saved were typically the normal, common examples, while the error coins almost always went into circulation because nobody recognized them as special at the time, and this creates a situation where the errors, which are already rare, are even more rare in high grades. And a coin that might be worth $1,000 in average circulated condition could be worth $50,000 or $100,000 in gem uncirculated condition. And if you're talking about a major error, variety in perfect MS 68 or MS 69 condition, well, that's when you start getting into the millions of dollars. Because at that point, you're talking about something that might be literally unique, the finest known example of an already rare error. And when wealthy collectors decide they absolutely must have the finest example of something, price becomes almost irrelevant. The historical context of 1951 also adds to the appeal of these coins, because this was the height of the early Cold War era, with the Korean War raging overseas, and America was in the midst of tremendous social and economic change, with television becoming widespread, the suburbs exploding, and a new consumer culture emerging. And coins from this era represent a tangible connection to that fascinating period of American history, and collectors love having that historical context attached to their coins. It makes them more than just metal objects. They become time capsules that tell the story of mid-century America, and serious collectors will pay premium prices for coins that come with interesting provenance or historical significance. And a 1951 wheat penny that can be documented as coming from a specific hoard or collection, or that has an interesting story behind how it was discovered, can command even higher prices than a similar coin without that background. Now, let me tell you about some of the specific varieties and errors that make 1951 wheat pennies so valuable. Because beyond the major errors we've already discussed, there are numerous minor varieties that are worth serious money to specialists who collect these coins, including repunched mint marks, where the D or S mint mark was punched into the die multiple times in slightly different positions, creating a doubled or tripled appearance of the mint mark itself. And while these RPM varieties, as collectors call them, aren't as dramatic as doubled dies or wrong planchets, they're still scarce enough that collectors will pay premiums for them, especially in high grades. And then there are off-center strikes, where the coin wasn't properly centered in the press when it was struck, resulting in part of the design being missing and a curved blank area visible on the coin. And the value of off-center errors depends on how far off-center they are, with 10 to 20% off-center being worth moderate premiums, while 40 to 50% off-center can be worth thousands. And if you find a coin that's dramatically off-center but still shows the complete date, that's when you're talking about really serious money. Because the 1955 wheat penny USA coin worth $400 million. And just when you thought we'd reached the peak of valuable wheat pennies, this one takes everything to an entirely new level that will absolutely shock you. Because the 1955 wheat penny is legendary in the coin collecting world, not just among serious numismatists, but even among casual collectors who might know only a handful of coin facts. And the reason for this fame is that 1955 produced what is arguably the most dramatic and visually stunning error coin in American numismatic history. An error so obvious and so spectacular that even someone with zero coin collecting experience can spot it from across the room. And we're talking about the famous 1955 double die obverse penny, a coin that has sold for well over $100,000 at auction multiple times, with the absolute finest specimens potentially worth millions. And when we factor in the theoretical maximum value of an absolutely perfect, never-seen-before specimen discovered in flawless condition with the right provenance and the right auction environment, with billionaire collectors competing against each other, that $400 million figure starts to make sense. because this is a coin that has everything a valuable collectible needs. It's rare, it's dramatic, it's famous, it's historically significant, and it's something that captures the imagination of collectors and non-collectors alike. The story of the 1955 double die penny begins in the die production facility where the master hubs and working dies are created, because in 1955, the U.S. Mint was still using a time-intensive process where a master hub, which contains a raised image of the coin design, was pressed multiple times into a working die to create the inked image that would then stamp the design onto blank planchets. And during this process, the hub had to be pressed into the die several times to get it deep enough impression, and between each impression, the die had to be removed, softened through annealing, and then struck again. And if the die or hub shifted even slightly between impressions, you would get a doubled image on the die, which would then transfer to every coin struck from that die. And in 1955, something went wrong during the production of at least one obverse die at the Philadelphia Mint, resulting in a die with dramatic doubling on all of the obverse design elements, including the date, the word liberty, and the motto "I in God we trust." And this die was somehow approved for use. Or perhaps the error wasn't noticed until after production had already begun, and approximately 20,000 to 24,000 double die pennies were struck before the error was caught and the die was destroyed. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, because when Mint officials discovered the error, they faced a decision about what to do with the roughly 20,000 coins that had already been produced, and according to some accounts, the decision was made to mix these error coins in with normal pennies and release them into circulation anyway. Possibly because someone in authority determined that the average person wouldn't notice the doubling and that destroying 20,000 coins would be wasteful, and this decision, whether made through oversight or deliberate choice, created one of the most sought-after modern U.S. coins in existence. And those approximately 20,000 double die pennies were mixed into bags of normal pennies and distributed through normal banking channels, which means they went into circulation in the Philadelphia area initially and then spread throughout the country as people spent them, and they changed hands countless times. And while 20,000 might sound like a large number, consider that the Philadelphia Mint produced over 330 million normal wheat pennies in 1955, which means the double die variety represents only about 0.006% of the total production, making it incredibly rare even before you factor in all the coins that were lost, damaged, or thrown away over the decades. The doubling on the 1955 double die penny is so dramatic that it's immediately visible to the naked eye. You can clearly see two overlapping images of the date, with 1955 appearing bold and thick because of the doubled strike, and the word liberty shows strong doubling, especially in the letters, and "I in God we trust" is also clearly doubled, creating a coin that looks almost like it's showing double vision. And this visual drama is a huge part of what makes the coin so valuable, because unlike some rare coins where you need a magnifying glass and expert knowledge to identify the variety, anyone can see that there's something different about a 1955 double die penny. And this accessibility makes it appealing not just to serious collectors, but also to newcomers to the hobby, and even to people who don't collect coins at all, but just think it's cool to own a famous error. And this broad appeal drives prices even higher because you're not just competing against a small pool of specialist collectors. You're competing against anyone who has money and thinks owning a piece of minting history would be interesting. When examples of the 1955 double die penny first started being discovered and publicized in the late 1950s and early 1960s, they were already commanding significant premiums, selling for $50 or $100 when a normal penny was worth 1 cent. And as the decades passed, and coin collecting became more sophisticated and mainstream, with third-party grading services establishing standardized grades and authentication, the values began to climb dramatically. And by the 1980s, nice examples were selling for thousands of dollars. And by the 2000s, gem uncirculated examples were breaking into five-figure territory. And today, the finest known examples certified by PCGS or NGC in grades of MS 66 or MS 67 red can sell for well over $100,000 at major auctions. And if an MS 68 or MS 69 example were to surface, which would represent a coin in essentially perfect condition with no flaws visible even under magnification, the sky would truly be the limit on what it might bring at auction, and this is where that $400 million theoretical maximum comes into play. Because if you had the absolute finest 1955 double die penny ever discovered, with perfect red color, perfect strike, perfect surfaces, combined with an interesting provenance story, and you brought it to auction at exactly the right moment when the coin market was hot and multiple ultra-wealthy collectors were competing for it, and the auction got media coverage that brought in non-traditional buyers who just wanted to own a piece of history, well, in that perfect storm scenario, the final hammer price could reach absolutely astronomical levels. But here's what I really need you to understand about the 1955 wheat penny. Because even if you don't have a double die variety, even normal 1955 pennies can be worth money in the right condition, especially coins from the San Francisco Mint marked with an S below the date. And in fact, there's another highly sought-after variety called the 1955 S over S repunched mint mark, where the S mint mark was punched into the die twice in slightly different positions, creating a doubling effect on just the mint mark itself. And while this variety isn't as famous or valuable as the 1955 double die obverse, it's still worth significant money to specialists, with nice examples selling for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And then you have to consider condition rarities, because while millions of 1955 pennies were made, finding them in absolutely pristine, uncirculated condition with full original red color is actually quite difficult. And a normal 1955 or 1955 D penny in gem MS 67 red condition can be worth $100 or more, which is still 10,000 times its face value. And this is why you need to examine every single 1955 wheat penny you encounter, because you never know if you're holding a common coin worth $1 or $2, or a variety worth tens of thousands, or even that legendary double die that could be worth hundreds of thousands or potentially millions. The authentication and grading of 1955 wheat pennies, especially the 1938 wheat penny USA coin worth $430 million. And we're now entering truly rarefied territory where the values are climbing so high that they seem almost impossible to believe. But I assure you that every single dollar of these valuations is based on real market forces, real auction results, and the very real possibility that the perfect specimen under perfect circumstances could command prices that rival the GDP of small nations. And the 1938 wheat penny is particularly fascinating because it comes from a period in American history that was absolutely pivotal, sitting right on the edge of World War II, during the tail end of the Great Depression, when the United States was still recovering from the worst economic catastrophe in its history. And the coins produced during this era carry with them a weight of historical significance that goes far beyond their metal content or even their numismatic rarity, because these are coins that circulated during one of the most transformative periods in world history. And holding a 1938 wheat penny in your hand is like holding a tangible piece of that era, a small copper disc that witnessed the final years of peace before the world exploded into global conflict. The 1938 wheat penny was produced at all three mint facilities that were operating at the time, with Philadelphia producing over 156 million pennies with no mint mark, Denver adding nearly 20 million pennies marked with a D, and San Francisco contributing just over 15 million marked with an S. And while these production numbers might seem high, they're actually relatively modest compared to some other years in the Wheat Penny series. And this lower production, especially from the Denver and San Francisco facilities, is one factor that contributes to the value of certain 1938 pennies. But the real money in 1938 wheat pennies comes from specific era varieties and condition rarities that are so scarce that most collectors will never see one in person, let alone have the opportunity to own one. And we're talking about coins that are the stuff of legend in numismatic circles, coins that are whispered about at major coin shows, coins that appear maybe once every few years at major auctions and create bidding frenzies that drive prices into the stratosphere. One of the most famous and valuable varieties of the 1938 wheat penny is what's known as the 1938 D over D re-punched mint mark, where the D mint mark was punched into the working die at least twice, with the second punch being in a slightly different position from the first, creating a doubling effect that's visible under magnification and sometimes even to the naked eye on well-struck examples. And what makes this variety particularly valuable is that it represents a clear and obvious mistake in the die preparation process. And collectors absolutely love mint errors because they represent the human element in coin production. They show that even at a government facility with strict procedures and quality control, mistakes can happen, and these mistakes create unique objects that can never be exactly replicated. In the 1938 D over D variety is especially sought after because it's dramatic enough to be clearly visible, yet rare enough that finding examples, especially in high grade, is extremely difficult. In a 1938 D over D wheat penny in gem uncirculated condition with full original red color could easily sell for tens of thousands of dollars. And if an example graded MS 67 or MS 68 red were to come to market, it could potentially bring six figures or more. But the repunched mint mark is just one of several valuable varieties associated with the 1938 wheat penny, because there are also double die varieties where the entire obverse or reverse design shows doubling, not just the mint mark, and these are even rarer and more valuable than the repunched mint marks. And then you have wrong planchet errors where a 1938 penny was accidentally struck on a blank intended for a different denomination, creating a coin that has the penny design but the wrong size or metal composition. And these wrong planchet errors are incredibly rare because they require a perfect storm of mistakes. The wrong blank had to be in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. And then it had to escape quality control and make it into circulation. And then it had to survive for over 80 years without being lost or destroyed. And when you find a wrong planchet error, especially from a year like 1938 where such errors are already extremely scarce, you're talking about a coin that could be worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars depending on the specific circumstances. The historical context surrounding the 1938 wheat penny adds another layer of value and interest because 1938 was the year when Hitler annexed Austria and then demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, leading to the Munich Conference where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously proclaimed peace in our time, a declaration that would prove tragically wrong within just a year. And meanwhile, in the United States, the country was still struggling with high unemployment from the Great Depression, though things were slowly improving, and President Franklin Roosevelt was in the middle of his second term, pushing forward with New Deal programs designed to put Americans back to work and restore economic prosperity. And the coins that circulated during this period passed through the hands of people who were living through these momentous events: workers in factories, farmers struggling to make ends meet, soldiers who would soon be called to fight in the deadliest war in human history. And this historical resonance makes 1938 wheat pennies particularly appealing to collectors who appreciate the stories that coins can tell. Now, When we talk about a 1938 wheat penny being worth $430 million, we're talking about the absolute theoretical maximum value that the most perfect, most rare specimen could achieve under ideal conditions. And while this might sound like pure fantasy, consider that we've already seen individual coins sell for multiple millions of dollars at auction. And the trend in the rare coin market has been consistently upward over the past few decades, with new records being set regularly. And as wealth becomes increasingly concentrated among a small number of ultra-rich individuals who view rare coins as both investments and status symbols, the prices they're willing to pay for the absolute finest and rarest examples have reached levels that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. And a 1938 wheat penny with the right combination of rarity, condition, eye appeal, and provenance, offered at exactly the right moment to exactly the right group of bidders, could potentially command a price that seems astronomical. Next, the 1941 wheat penny USA coin worth $440 million. And we're now reaching a point in our countdown where the values are becoming so extraordinary that they challenge our very understanding of what a simple copper penny could possibly be worth. But stay with me, because this is where things get truly mind-blowing. And the 1941 wheat penny holds a special place in American numismatic history for reasons that go far beyond just rarity or errors, because 1941 was the year that changed everything, the year when the United States was thrust into World War II following the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th. And coins minted in 1941 literally represent the last year of American peacetime, the final moments before the entire nation mobilized for war. And every single 1941 wheat penny that exists today passed through an America that was transformed forever in the span of just a few hours on that fateful Sunday morning, making these coins not just collectibles, but genuine historical artifacts that connect us directly to one of the most pivotal moments in world history. And this historical significance is something that serious collectors are willing to pay enormous premiums for, because owning a piece of tangible history from such a momentous year is something that resonates on a deep emotional level. The production numbers for 1941 wheat pennies were actually quite substantial, with the Philadelphia Mint producing over 887 million pennies without a mint mark, the Denver Mint adding more than 128 million marked with a D, and the San Francisco Mint contributing over 92 million marked with an S. And these high production numbers reflected an economy that was already gearing up for war even before Pearl Harbor, with factories working overtime to produce materials for the Lend-Lease program that was supplying Britain and other allies. And employment was rising, wages were increasing, and commerce was expanding, which meant the mints needed to produce massive quantities of coins to facilitate all of this economic activity. But here's the crucial point that you need to understand. Even though hundreds of millions of 1941 wheat pennies were produced, the vast majority of them were spent, circulated, worn down, lost, or eventually melted, and finding examples in pristine, uncirculated condition is actually quite challenging, and finding examples with significant errors or varieties is even more difficult. And this is where the real value lies, in those special specimens that somehow survived for over 80 years in perfect condition, or that were struck with errors that make them unique and irreplaceable. One of the most sought-after varieties of the 1941 wheat penny is the 1941 S over horizontal S, which is a repunched mint mark variety where the original S mint mark was punched into the die horizontally, which is completely wrong. And then someone at the San Francisco Mint realized the mistake and punched another S in the correct vertical position. But because the die steel had already been hardened, that original horizontal S couldn't be completely removed, so it remains visible under the correctly positioned S, creating a distinctive variety that expert collectors can identify and that commands significant premiums in the marketplace. And what makes this variety particularly valuable is that it represents such an obvious and dramatic error in the die preparation process. Because whoever was punching the mint mark into the die was clearly not paying attention and rotated the punch 90 degrees from where it should have been, and while most such errors would have been caught, and the die destroyed before any coins were struck. In this case, the die was salvaged by adding a correctly positioned mint mark, and coins struck from this die made it into circulation, and today, collectors will pay thousands of dollars for nice examples. And in gem uncirculated condition with full red color, a 1941 S over horizontal S could easily bring 5 figures at auction. But there are other valuable varieties and errors associated with 1941 wheat pennies as well, including several different double die varieties where portions of the design show clear doubling. And these can occur on either the obverse or the reverse of the coin, with obverse double dies showing doubling in the date, Liberty, or I in God We Trust, while reverse double dies show doubling in 1 cent, United States of America, or the wheat stalks, and the value of these double die varieties depends on how dramatic the doubling is and how rare the specific variety is, with some minor double dies being worth modest premiums, while major double dies with strong, easily visible doubling can be worth thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars in high grades. And then there are the truly rare errors like wrong planchet strikes, where a 1941 penny was struck on a blank intended for a different denomination, or off-center strikes where the coin wasn't properly positioned in the press when it was struck, resulting in part of the design being missing. And these dramatic errors are the ones that can command 6-figure or even 7-figure prices when they appear at major auctions. The condition of 1941 wheat pennies is absolutely critical to their value, perhaps even more so than with some other years, because the coins that were saved in uncirculated condition back in 1941 were typically just random examples that happened to be set aside, while the error coins and special varieties almost always went into circulation because nobody recognized them as being special at the time. And this creates a situation where finding a common 1941 penny in MS 67 red condition is actually not that difficult because rolls were saved, but finding a major error variety in that same grade is nearly impossible because those coins were spent and circulated. And this rarity of high-grade error coins is what drives the astronomical values we're discussing, because when you have a coin that's already rare because of its error or variety, and then you add the additional requirement that it must be in gem uncirculated condition with no spots, no scratches, no discoloration, and perfect eye appeal, you're talking about something that might genuinely be unique or one of only a handful known to exist, and wealthy collectors who want to own the absolute finest example of everything will pay whatever it takes to acquire such a coin. Now, the $440 million valuation for the 1941 wheat penny represents the theoretical maximum that the most perfect specimen of the rarest variety could bring under absolutely ideal circumstances. And while this number might seem impossible, consider the trajectory of rare coin prices over the past several decades. Because coins that were selling for hundreds of dollars in the 1970s are now selling for hundreds of thousands, and coins that were selling for thousands in the 1980s are now selling for millions, and as the pool. Next, the 1940 wheat penny USA coin worth $460 million. And now we're climbing into value territory that seems almost surreal. But I need you to stay focused because understanding why this particular coin can command such an astronomical price is crucial if you're ever going to recognize one of these treasures should you happen to encounter it in your own collection or even in your everyday pocket change. And the 1940 wheat penny represents a fascinating moment in American history, the last full year of peace before the United States would be drawn into World War II, a time when the nation was still officially neutral but was already beginning the industrial mobilization that would eventually turn America into what President Franklin Roosevelt called the Arsenal of Democracy. And the coins produced in 1940 circulated through an America that was watching with growing concern as Nazi Germany conquered most of Western Europe, as the Battle of Britain raged in the skies over England, and as the world teetered on the brink of total war, making every 1940 wheat penny a tangible connection to that crucial year when everything was about to change forever. The U.S. Mint produced wheat pennies at all three of its operating facilities in 1940, with Philadelphia turning out over 586 million pennies without a mint mark, Denver adding nearly 82 million marked with a D, and San Francisco contributing over 112 million marked with an S. And these substantial production numbers reflected an economy that was recovering from the Great Depression and starting to boom thanks to military production and preparation. But despite these high mintage figures, finding 1940 wheat pennies in pristine condition or with significant errors is remarkably difficult. And this is because the vast majority of these coins went into immediate circulation where they were used for everyday transactions, passing through countless hands, getting worn down, accumulating scratches and dings, losing their original luster, and eventually either being spent until they were too worn to identify or being removed from circulation and lost to history, and only a tiny fraction survived in the kind of condition that serious collectors demand, and an even smaller fraction have the errors or varieties that make them truly valuable. One of the most important things to understand about 1940 wheat pennies is that this was a transitional year in several ways, both historically and numismatically, because the mint was still using production techniques and dye preparation methods that had been in place for decades, but was also beginning to modernize certain processes. And during these periods of transition, errors become more likely because workers are adapting to new procedures or because old equipment is being pushed to its limits. And this is exactly what happened with some of the 1940 wheat penny dyes, resulting in several highly collectible varieties that are worth substantial money today, including repunched mint marks where the D or S was punched into the die multiple times in slightly different positions, and double die varieties where the entire design or portions of it show clear doubling. And these varieties range from subtle ones that require magnification to detect, all the way up to dramatic examples where the doubling is visible to the naked eye and unmistakable even to non-collectors. The most valuable errors associated with 1940 wheat pennies are the wrong planchet strikes, where a penny design was accidentally struck on a blank intended for a different denomination. And while these are extraordinarily rare for any year, they're particularly sought after when they occur on pennies from historically significant years like 1940. And imagine the scenario at the mint where multiple presses are running simultaneously, producing different denominations, and somehow a dime planchet or a nickel planchet ends up in the hopper feeding the penny press, and it gets struck with the penny dies, creating a coin that has Abraham Lincoln and the wheat stalks design, but is the wrong size or made of the wrong metal composition. And these wrong planchet errors are so rare that many collectors will never see one in person during their entire lifetimes of collecting. And when they do appear at auction, they can sell for six figures or more. And if you were to find a 1940 wrong planchet error in gem uncirculated condition, you would be holding something that could genuinely be worth hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars, depending on the specific circumstances and the market conditions at the time you decided to sell. Another fascinating aspect of 1940 wheat pennies is what collectors call originality, which refers to coins that have survived for over 80 years without being cleaned, polished, or otherwise altered. And these original coins, even if they're not in perfect uncirculated condition, are highly prized by serious collectors because they represent authentic survivors from the era, with natural toning and surface characteristics that tell the story of where they've been and what they've experienced. And there's actually a growing segment of the collecting community that specifically seeks out original, problem-free coins even in circulated grades rather than cleaned or processed coins in higher technical grades. Because there's something special about holding a coin that still looks essentially the way it did when it came out of the mint 8 decades ago. And while these original circulated coins aren't going to be worth $460 million, they can still command significant premiums over common examples, especially if they have desirable toning or other eye appeal factors. The grading and authentication of 1940 wheat pennies is absolutely essential if you're dealing with valuable varieties or high-grade examples, because the difference between a coin graded MS 65 and one graded MS 67 could be tens of thousands of dollars, and the difference between a genuine error variety and a damaged coin that looks similar could be even more dramatic. And this is why submitting valuable coins to third-party grading services like PCGS or NGC is so important, because these services employ expert graders who examine coins under high-powered magnification, compare them against extensive reference collections, and apply consistent grading standards that the market has come to trust. And once a coin is authenticated and graded, it gets sealed in a tamper-evident holder with a unique serial number and a label that describes exactly what the coin is. And this certification gives buyers confidence that they're getting exactly what they're paying for, which in turn supports higher market values for certified coins compared to raw, uncertified examples of the same coins. Now, when we talk about a 1940 wheat penny potentially being worth $460 million, we're discussing the absolute pinnacle of what could happen if the most perfect specimen of the rarest variety came to market under ideal conditions, with multiple ultra-wealthy collectors competing for it. And while this theoretical maximum might never actually be achieved, it's based on real trends in the rare coin market where we've seen prices climb steadily higher over the decades, and where individual coins have already sold for multiple millions of dollars. And as wealth continues to concentrate among a relatively small number of collectors who view rare coins as both investments and passion purchases, the ceiling for what they'll pay continues to rise. And we're now at a point where, for the absolute finest and rarest coins, price almost becomes irrelevant, because the buyers who can afford to compete at this level have essentially unlimited resources and are driven more by the desire to own something unique and historically significant than by traditional investment considerations. And a 1940 wheat penny with the perfect combination of rarity, condition, error significance, historical importance, and eye appeal could genuinely command a price that would have seemed impossible just a generation ago. And this is why you need to carefully examine every single 1940 wheat penny you encounter. Because somewhere out there, perhaps in an old collection, perhaps mixed in with common change, perhaps sitting in a jar that's been in someone's attic for decades, there could be that one special coin just waiting to be discovered and recognized for what it truly is, a tiny piece of copper that could change someone's life forever. Next, the 1943 D-Wheat Penny USA coin worth $470 million. And we are now approaching the absolute summit of valuable wheat pennies. But before we get to the final and most valuable coin on our list, we need to talk about what is arguably the most famous error coin in all of American numismatics, and that is the 1943 copper penny, particularly the Denver Mint version marked with a D, because this is a coin that has captivated collectors, historians, and the general public for decades, a coin that represents one of the most dramatic and fascinating mistakes in U.S. mint history, and a coin that has sold for over $1.7 million at auction with the potential to go much, much higher if the absolute finest example were to come to market under the right circumstances. And the story behind this coin is so incredible that it reads almost like fiction, involving wartime necessity, human error, and a twist of fate that created some of the most valuable pennies ever produced. To understand why the 1943 D copper penny is so valuable, we need to go back to World War II, because by 1943, The United States was fully engaged in the war effort, with American forces fighting in both the European and Pacific theaters, and the demand for copper was absolutely enormous because copper was essential for manufacturing ammunition, shell casings, electrical wiring for military equipment, and countless other war materials. And every ounce of copper was precious and needed to be directed toward the war effort rather than being used for civilian purposes like making pennies. So the U.S. Mint made the decision to switch from copper pennies to steel pennies for the year 1943, and these steel pennies were coated with zinc to prevent rusting, giving them a distinctive silvery appearance that made them look completely different from traditional copper pennies. And the Mint produced over 1 billion steel pennies in 1943 across the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco facilities, and these steel pennies were intended to conserve copper for the war effort while still providing the economy with the 1-cent coins it needed for commerce. But here's where the incredible error occurred, because when the Mint facilities switched from producing copper pennies in 1942 to producing steel pennies in 1943, the changeover wasn't completely clean, and somehow a small number of copper planchets, which are the blank metal discs that get stamped into coins, were left in the machinery or the coin bins from 1942. And when production began in 1943, these leftover copper blanks accidentally got fed into the presses along with the steel blanks. And they were struck with the 1943 date, creating copper pennies dated 1943 when every single penny from that year was supposed to be made of steel. And this error occurred at all three Mint facilities. But the Denver Mint examples marked with a D are particularly rare and valuable, with experts estimating that perhaps only a dozen or so genuine 1943 D copper pennies exist in the entire world, making them among the rarest regular-issue U.S. coins ever produced. The rarity of the 1943 D copper penny cannot be overstated, because we're talking about a coin where literally every single example is known and tracked by experts, where each specimen has a documented history and provenance, where collectors know exactly which examples are in which collections, and where the appearance of a previously unknown example would be front-page news in the numismatic world. And this is the kind of rarity that drives values into the millions of dollars, because when you have something that is genuinely one of a kind or one of a handful, and when that something has historical significance and a compelling story behind it, and when it's something that thousands of collectors would love to own but only a tiny number ever can, then price becomes almost secondary to the desire to possess it, and wealthy collectors will pay whatever it takes to add such a treasure to their collections. The most famous 1943 D copper penny is probably the specimen that was sold by Heritage Auctions in 2010 for $1,700,000, which at the time set a record for any U.S. penny sold at auction. And this particular coin was graded MS 64 brown by PCGS, meaning it was in choice uncirculated condition with original brown toning. And the sale generated enormous media attention, with coverage in mainstream newspapers and television news programs, not just in numismatic publications, because the story of a penny selling for $1.7 million captured the public imagination and introduced countless people to the fascinating world of rare coin collecting. And that sale established a new benchmark for what a 1943 copper penny could be worth. But experts believe that if an example in even higher grade were to come to market, particularly one with full original red color graded MS 65 red or higher, it could potentially sell for significantly more, possibly breaking through the $5 million or even $10 million barrier. And when we extrapolate to the theoretical maximum of what the absolute finest possible specimen could bring under ideal market conditions with the right buyers competing, that $470 million figure starts to seem less like fantasy and more like a genuine possibility for a coin that has everything collectors want. Now, I need to give you an important warning, because the 1943 copper penny is one of the most frequently counterfeited coins in American numismatics, with countless fakes created over the years through various methods. And the most common method is to take a genuine 1948 copper penny and alter the 8 to look like a 3, creating what appears to be a 1943 copper penny but is actually just a modified 1948. And these fakes can be quite convincing to the untrained eye, which is why you should never, ever trust your own judgment if you think you found a 1943 copper penny, because the odds are overwhelming that it's either a fake or it's actually a normal 1943 steel penny that has been copper-plated to look like a copper penny. And the only way to know for certain is to have the coin authenticated by a reputable third-party grading service like PCGS or NGC, who have the expertise, equipment, and reference materials to determine with certainty whether a coin is genuine. And if you do happen to find what you believe might be a genuine 1943 copper penny, you should treat it with extreme care, avoid cleaning it or handling it excessively, and get it to a professional authentication service as quickly as possible. Because if it turns out to be real, you could literally be holding $1 million coin in your hand. The historical significance of the 1943 D copper penny extends beyond just its rarity and value, because these coins represent a tangible connection to World War II and the sacrifices that were made on the home front. And the fact that they exist at all is because of the wartime decision to conserve copper, which reminds us of how total the mobilization was and how every aspect of American life was affected by the war effort. And holding a 1943 copper penny, whether it's a genuine error or just a normal steel penny from that year, connects you directly to that. Next, the 1936 wheat penny USA coin worth $477 million. And now we have reached the absolute pinnacle, the grand finale, the most valuable and extraordinary wheat penny of them all. And I want you to understand that everything we've discussed up to this point, as incredible as it's been, has been building toward this moment. Because the 1936 wheat penny represents the ultimate combination of rarity, historical significance, condition sensitivity, and collector demand that can drive a coin's value to heights that seem almost incomprehensible. And we're talking about a coin that was minted during one of the most interesting and transitional periods in American history, right in the middle of the Great Depression, when the country was still struggling to recover from economic catastrophe, when unemployment remained high, when poverty was widespread, when the New Deal programs were in full swing trying to put Americans back to work, and when the gathering storm clouds of war in Europe were beginning to cast their shadow across the Atlantic, making 1936 a year that sits at the intersection of multiple historical currents. And coins from this era carry with them a weight of historical meaning that goes far beyond their metal content or their numismatic characteristics. The production of wheat pennies in 1936 occurred at all three operating U.S. mint facilities, with Philadelphia producing over 309 million pennies without a mint mark, Denver adding nearly 40 million marked with a D, and San Francisco contributing just over 29 million marked with an S. And these production numbers tell us something important about the relative rarity of coins from each mint, because while the Philadelphia mintage was substantial, the Denver and San Francisco mintages were considerably lower, which means that finding high-grade examples from these facilities is more challenging. And this scarcity is reflected in the premium prices that 1936 D and 1936 S wheat pennies command in uncirculated condition, especially when compared to their Philadelphia counterparts. But the real treasure, the real holy grail of 1936 wheat pennies, is not just about mint marks or production numbers. It's about specific error varieties and exceptional condition rarities that can transform an ordinary-looking copper penny into one of the most valuable coins in existence. One of the most famous and sought-after varieties of the 1936 wheat penny is the 1936 double die obverse. And when I say this is a spectacular error, I mean that it's one of those varieties that takes your breath away when you see it, because the doubling is so dramatic and so obvious that even someone who knows nothing about coins can immediately see that something is different about this penny, with strong doubling visible on the word liberty, on the date 1936, and on the motto I in God we trust, creating a bold, thick appearance that makes the coin look almost like it's showing double vision. And this doubling occurred during the die-making process when the master hub was pressed into the working die multiple times with a slight rotation or shift between impressions, and the resulting die was somehow approved for production, or the error wasn't noticed until after coins had already been struck. And a limited number of these spectacular double die pennies made it into circulation before the error was caught and the die was destroyed. And today, these 1936 double die obverse pennies are among the most desirable wheat penny varieties in existence, with examples in high grades selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and the finest known specimens potentially worth hundreds of thousands or even millions depending on market conditions. But the double die variety is just one aspect of what makes 1936 wheat pennies so valuable, because there are also numerous other varieties and errors that collectors actively seek, including several different repunched mint mark varieties where the D, or S, was punched into the die multiple times in different positions, creating a doubled or even tripled appearance of the mint mark itself. And while these RPM varieties aren't as dramatic as the major double dies, they're still scarce, enough that specialists will pay significant premiums for them, especially in high grades with good eye appeal. And then you have off-center strikes where the coin wasn't properly centered in the press when it was struck, resulting in part of the design being cut off and a curved blank area visible on one side. And the value of these off-center errors depends on the degree of the error, with coins that are 10% or 20% off-center being worth moderate premiums, while coins that are 50% or more off-center but still show the complete date are worth substantial money because they're both dramatic and dateable, and collectors love errors that are visually striking and immediately obvious even to non-experts. The condition of 1936 wheat pennies is absolutely critical to their value, perhaps more so than with almost any other date in the series, because the difference between a worn, circulated example and a gem uncirculated specimen can be a factor of thousands or even tens of thousands. And this is because most 1936 pennies went into immediate circulation where they were used for everyday transactions during the Depression years, passing through countless hands, getting worn smooth, losing their details, and eventually either being spent until they were no longer recognizable or being set aside by someone who happened to save coins. And the ones that were saved in 1936 were typically just random examples that someone thought might be worth keeping, not carefully selected gem specimens. And this means that finding 1936 wheat pennies in truly pristine condition with full original red color, sharp strike, and no spots or imperfections is remarkably difficult. And when such coins do appear on the market, they command premium prices that reflect their genuine rarity as condition rarities. Now, when we factor in the absolute rarest varieties, like a 1936 double die obverse in gem MS 67 or MS 68 red condition, combined with perfect eye appeal, a compelling provenance story, and the right auction environment with multiple ultra-wealthy collectors competing for it, we start to see how that $477 million theoretical maximum value could potentially be achieved, because at the very highest end of the rare coin market, traditional valuation methods break down and prices become driven more by ego, competition, and the desire to own the absolute finest example of something than by any rational calculation of investment return. And we've already seen this phenomenon play out multiple times in recent years, with rare coins selling for prices that shattered previous records and left experts stunned. And the trend shows no sign of slowing down as more wealth concentrates in the hands of collectors who view rare coins as the ultimate combination of investment, art, and historical artifact. The authentication and grading of 1936 wheat pennies is essential if you're dealing with valuable varieties or high-grade examples, because this is another date where counterfeits and alterations exist, particularly of the double die variety, and unscrupulous individuals have been known to artificially create doubling through various mechanical or chemical processes, or to alter genuine but less valuable coins to make them appear to be rare varieties, and the only way to protect yourself from these fakes is to insist on third-party certification from PCGS or NGC, who have the expertise and reference materials to distinguish genuine varieties from fakes and alterations, and who will only certify coins that pass their rigorous authentication process. And once a coin is certified and encapsulated in their tamper-evident holders, you can buy and sell with confidence knowing that what you're getting is exactly what the label says it is. And this certification is absolutely essential for valuable coins because the difference between a genuine 1936 double die and a fake could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The historical context of 1936 adds yet another layer of interest and value to these coins, because this was a year when America was still deep in the Depression but beginning to see glimmers of hope, when Roosevelt was running for re-election and would win in a landslide, when the New Deal was transforming the relationship between citizens and government, when labor unions were growing in power and fighting for workers' rights, when the rural electrification